Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Get comfortable and relax. Story 1. Recently I found myself diving deeper into the world of cosplay. It started off slowly, just making a few outfits for fun, but it soon grew into something I genuinely enjoyed. I love crafting the clothes, learning new patterns, discovering how to bring characters to life with thread and fabric. After a while I began attending conventions. At first I was nervous, who wouldn't be? But soon I found myself looking forward to them. I'd gone to a handful over the year, always enjoying the creative energy and the buzz of excitement in the air. For the most part, the people I met were kind, welcoming, and just as enthusiastic about the world of cosplay as I was. This story, however, is about the first time that warm, welcoming atmosphere shifted. The first time I realized that even a place filled with imagination and creativity could hold something unnerving, something you can't shake, no matter how many times you try to. At this particular convention, I wore a Supergirl cosplay I had designed and sewn myself. It had taken weeks of careful measurements and countless revisions, but I was proud of how it turned out. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. A handful of attendees asked to take pictures with me throughout the day, which I happily agreed to. That kind of interaction was part of the joy of conventions. It felt good knowing someone appreciated the work I'd put in. Later in the evening, after walking the floor for hours, I took a quiet break. My friends had left for the day, but I was planning to meet up with a different group later that night. I found a quiet hallway with a small seating area and sat down, just enjoying the hum of the building around me. Then someone approached me. A guy, maybe late 20s, carrying a camera slung around his neck. He asked if he could take a photo. I said sure, standing up and striking a relaxed pose. But before he even raised his camera, he said something that made my stomach twist. Thank you for being one of the few cosplayers who actually has the physique to pull off that character. I blinked. Excuse me? I asked, not quite sure I had heard him correctly. He seemed to realize, belatedly, how inappropriate it sounded. He began backpedaling, trying to explain himself. I didn't want to hear it. I felt sick. All the joy I had felt just moments before seemed to drain away. I picked up my bag and started walking away, hoping he'd get the message. But he didn't. Instead, he grabbed me, not harshly, but with enough force to stop me in my tracks. His hand gripped my arm as he tried to physically block my path, trying to get me to stay and listen to his explanation. I shoved him away, firm and clear. Do not touch me, I said loudly, attracting the attention of a few passers-by. I walked away without looking back, my heart pounding. He shouted something after me, but I wasn't paying attention anymore. I just needed distance. I didn't want to hear another word. I didn't get the chance to report him immediately. I just needed to get out of that hallway to breathe. About 15 minutes later, I was walking toward the food court to meet my other friends when I saw him again. He hadn't left. He was still there, watching. His eyes locked on me with a stare that made my skin crawl. His expression was hollow, almost smug, as if none of it had ever happened. I immediately made a beeline for the nearest staff member. I explained what had happened, the way he had grabbed me, how he had followed me afterward. The staff member listened attentively, nodding. While I was talking, I noticed he had started walking toward us, slowly, like he wasn't finished with the conversation. He stopped about 5 feet away from me and began to speak, as if rehearsed. What I meant was that most cosplayers are overweight. I cut him off. Don't talk to me, I said flatly, turning away. My friends had just arrived, and I didn't want him anywhere near me. The staff member took over from there, escorting him away. Later that night, I followed up with the convention operations team. They told me they had spoken to him and placed him on a watch list. I asked what that meant. The staff explained that they couldn't ban him from the entire convention just yet, but he would be monitored, and they'd take further action if anything else happened. They also told me that he claimed he was autistic and didn't intend to cause harm. I paused at that. That doesn't change the fact that he did, I said. He made me feel unsafe. He grabbed me. That's not okay, no matter the explanation. The staff member agreed and assured me that they would continue to monitor him closely. Still, I left the convention feeling uneasy. It wasn't just what had happened, it was how quickly something that had felt safe, creative and empowering could turn into something suffocating and threatening. I only attended the convention on Friday, since I had to work the rest of the weekend. I don't know if he showed up again or if anything else happened, but even now, the encounter lingers. It hangs in the back of my mind, like an echo. Conventions are supposed to be places of joy and self-expression. For most people they are, but every now and then, someone comes along who reminds you that not everyone respects those boundaries. Someone who turns admiration into entitlement, who sees a costume as an invitation rather than a piece of art. I still cosplay, I still go to conventions, but I'm a little more cautious now, a little more guarded. I've learned to read the energy in a room, to trust my instincts when something feels off. To the guy from that hallway, don't come near me again. And to every cosplayer out there, your body is not a costume. You owe no one a photo. No one has the right to make you feel unsafe in your own skin. Your art is your power. Own it. Protect it. And if someone tries to take that power from you, don't be afraid to walk away. You're not being rude. You're being strong. Story 2. This is a story I still think about from time to time, and even now, it creeps me out. Nearly 3 years ago, I was 17. Life had already hardened me more than it should have at that age. My mother and I were constantly on the move. She struggled with her own issues and couldn't hold down a job for very long. That meant we were often without a place to stay, bouncing from one friend's house to another, never really rooted anywhere. On the rare occasions we had something that resembled stability, it never lasted long. And just like that, with the snap of a finger, we'd be forced to pack up and move again. At 17, I was already familiar with the idea of homelessness. I had spent more nights sleeping on the street than I'd ever want to admit. So when it happened again, when we found ourselves without a home once more, I didn't panic. I was used to it. My mother was fortunate enough to be able to stay at her boyfriend's trailer, but I had no such luck. I didn't have friends anymore. I had cut everyone off because those friendships were toxic and draining, bad for my mental health. My mum offered for me to stay with her, but I declined. I didn't want to be in the way, caught between her and her boyfriend. I was used to the streets anyway, and I didn't think it was that bad at the time. So there I was, getting dropped off at a McDonald's, grabbing some burgers and heading out into the night. I didn't have a plan, just the familiar pattern of searching for a safe spot to sleep. The sun dipped below the horizon and darkness wrapped the world in silence. I wandered, trying one place after another, but nothing felt right. Some were too hot, others too bright, and the mosquitoes were unbearable in many spots. Then I remembered an old house that was under construction, a place I used to go sometimes, just to chill. It was nearly finished, quiet and sealed enough that mosquitoes couldn't get in. That night it sounded like heaven. I made my way around the back and crept in like I always had. The air inside was stale but calm. I walked up the stairs carefully and eventually settled in the bathroom. There was less debris on the floor, so it seemed like the best place to lay down. I stretched out on the cool tile and tried to sleep. As I lay there, I started to hear faint noises downstairs. I didn't think much of them at first. I assumed it was the wind swinging the door I came in through, or maybe just the house settling. An hour passed. I scrolled through old photos on my phone, memories from better times, reminders of everything I'd lost. The noises continued but remained distant and irregular. I didn't pay them much attention. I was used to strange sounds in abandoned places. Eventually I gave up on sleep and decided to step outside onto the back porch. The air was a little cooler there, and maybe I'd be able to clear my head. I slipped quietly downstairs and stepped out through the back door, sitting down with my phone in hand, the screen casting a faint glow. I was lost in thought, maybe 5 minutes into scrolling, when I caught something. Their movement to my left. It came from the very back door I had just exited. I turned my head slightly, expecting maybe a cat, a raccoon, or even another homeless person looking for shelter, but what I saw froze every muscle in my body. A man was peeking around the corner inside the house, only partially visible. His lower body was hidden behind the wall, but his upper torso leaned unnaturally to the side as if trying to look at me without being seen fully. It was like he was trying to observe me in secret, shrouded completely in darkness. His body was black, featureless, and I couldn't make out a single detail, just a silhouette. And he didn't move, not even a twitch. He was still, like a statue, his gaze fixed on me. I stared back, unmoving. It felt like we sat locked in that moment for an eternity, though it must have only been a minute or two. I kept expecting him to speak, to step out, to do something. But he didn't. And that silence, that stillness, was worse than anything he could have said. At first I thought he might just be another person like me, homeless. Maybe we were just two people trying to survive the night, but something about his presence felt off, wrong. Most homeless folks I'd met were quick to say something, to start a conversation. This man remained completely silent. Eventually I stood up slowly and grabbed my bike that I had left leaning against the wall. I walked, not ran, toward the edge of the property. As I stepped into the backyard, I looked through the window beside the back door, the same one the man had been standing near, and there he was, still watching. The moonlight caught just enough of his face for me to make out the top of his head, and his eye, just one pale eye gleaming as it followed me. He was white, very tall, and wearing a dark jacket. The rest of his features remained hidden in shadows, but the way he watched me, it wasn't casual, it was cold, focused. I moved faster. I didn't run, but I didn't waste time either. I made it to the front of the house, glanced back one last time, but the man was gone. Still, I felt eyes on me. I waved goodbye to the house, an odd ritual to break the tension, and pedaled off into the night. That night I couldn't sleep. I tried 2 more locations, but each one felt wrong. My mind kept returning to that silhouette, to the eye in the moonlight. What was he doing in there? Was he just like me, trying to find a safe space to sleep, or was there more to it? The way he stared at me. It wasn't the gaze of a fellow traveler, it was something else. I keep wondering what would have happened if I had stayed. If I had fallen asleep in that bathroom, unaware of his presence. Would he have just stood there, watching me the entire night? Or worse, I'll never know, and I don't want to. After that experience, I stopped going into places like that. I don't take chances anymore. The street might be rough, but at least I can see what's coming. To the man shrouded in darkness, let's not meet again. Story 3. This happened about 4 or 5 years ago when I was still living with my mother in a small shed on a farm tucked deep in the countryside. Our little plot of land sat among rolling fields and clusters of dense woodland, and although it felt remote, we weren't entirely alone. The larger farmland had been split into pieces and sold off over time, so we did have neighbours. Though they were far off in the distance, at least half a kilometre away in each direction, still the space gave us privacy, and the land, though humble, felt like our own. I developed a habit of walking the looping road that circled the property, especially in the evenings. The circuit was simple. The first part of the walk was out in the open, visible from all the nearby farms, including ours. The second half, however, took me through a 200-metre stretch of thick woods that served as a divider between the back road and the fields. It was peaceful, quiet. I used to love the solitude it offered, a brief escape from everything. Sometimes I'd walk at dusk. Other times, when I couldn't sleep, I set out well past midnight. Back then, I didn't think much of walking alone through the woods at 2 a.m. Looking back now, I realize how naive that was. I've never walked after dark since, not after what happened that night. It was late. I don't remember the exact time, only that the sky above was pitch black, and the only light I had came from the weak beam of my flashlight. I was almost at the end of the wooded path, nearing the bend that would return me to the open road and bring me back toward the farm. I remember the silence being unnaturally thick, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. And then I heard it, a voice. Soft, monotoned, coming from somewhere deeper in the trees. Help, help. The words echoed gently, emotionless. It didn't sound panicked, not frightened or distressed, just flat, as if the person was going through the motions, repeating something they'd said too many times before. My footsteps slowed, and I slipped out one of my earbuds, thinking maybe I was mishearing the wind or some distant animal, but no, it was still there. Help. The rational part of me, the one raised to believe in kindness, in helping others, told me that someone could be in trouble, that maybe they were hurt, maybe they'd gotten lost or fallen. But another part of me, a deeper instinct I didn't usually listen to, whispered something else. That something wasn't right, that I needed to turn around, that whatever was making that sound wasn't normal. For a moment, I stood there, frozen in indecision. My feet felt heavy, my heart was starting to pound, though I wasn't sure why. And then I remembered, my cat. She had followed me on my walk that night, as she often did. A small grey tabby who loved our late-night adventures. I turned to look for her, and that's when I saw her walking toward the voice. She was moving cautiously, her little body low to the ground, her tail puffed up in warning. She let out a soft hiss as she crept forward. My heart dropped. I tried to call her back in a low whisper, afraid that any louder sound might alert whoever Dot, or whatever D was, out there. But she didn't come. She kept walking, drawn toward the voice like something unseen had hooked her attention. I couldn't leave her, so I took a deep breath and crept forward, crouching low and moving as quietly as I could, trying not to make a sound. My flashlight stayed off. I didn't want to give away my position. I found her about 10 feet ahead, frozen, her ears flat against her skull, still staring into the darkness beyond the trees. I scooped her up and turned to run. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. I just ran, my legs pushing harder and faster than they ever had. I tore through the woods, crashing through the underbrush, snapping twigs and crunching leaves with every panicked step. The voice had stopped. The only sound now was my breathing, my pounding footsteps, and the blood rushing in my ears. I made it out of the woods and didn't stop running until I was back in the house, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it tight. I stood there gasping for air, my cat clutched to my chest, trembling. My mother came rushing out of her room, alarmed by the noise. I told her everything, and I wished that was the end of it. But I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, tossing and turning, wondering if someone had really needed help. What if I'd left someone behind? What if they were lying there, hurt, unable to move? That thought haunted me through the early hours, so much so that I asked my mum to come with me the next morning to go back and check. We got in the car and drove to the same spot, retracing my steps from the night before. The woods looked different in the daylight, softer, almost welcoming. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, the birds were singing. Nothing looked out of place. We walked slowly through the area where I'd heard the voice, calling out every few steps. "Hello? Is anyone there? Do you need help?" There was no reply, no movement, no signs that anyone had been there at all, no clothing, no footprints, no discarded bags or signs of injury. But still, something felt wrong. That quiet from the night before, it had been real. The voice had been real. I didn't imagine it. We returned home, a little shaken, but trying to brush it off. Maybe it had been an animal, we told ourselves. Maybe someone playing a prank, or a hiker who had gotten lost and eventually found their way out. But I knew better. I could still hear the flat tone of that voice in my mind. It hadn't sounded like someone in distress, it sounded rehearsed, like a trap. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake it. I found myself replaying the scene over and over, trying to make sense of it. What would have happened if I'd responded? If I'd walked toward the voice instead of away? The theories began to surface, slow and creeping, each one worse than the last. What if someone had been hiding there, waiting for someone to fall for the bait? What if the voice wasn't human at all? Kidnappers, murderers, something not of this world. The possibilities circled through my head like shadows on the wall, refusing to be pinned down. And my cat, my brave little guardian. What had she sensed? Animals know things. They feel things we don't. She had never reacted that way before, and never did again. To this day, I've never walked in those woods after dark, not even at dusk. If I go for a walk, it's always before 6, always with light in the sky. And I never wear my earbuds anymore. I keep my ears open, just in case, because sometimes in the silence of the trees, I can almost hear it again, soft, monotone, emotionless. Help! Help! And every time I do, I remember that night and I walk a little faster, a little farther from the tree line, just in case it's still out there. Story 4. In March of last year, I spent the month traveling solo through Europe. It was something I had always wanted to do. The time to explore new cultures, experience new cities, and reclaim a little of the peace I felt I'd lost over the past few years. Most of the trip was incredible. Every city held something unique, and overall I felt remarkably safe, even as a woman traveling alone. But there was one moment, a single interaction, that still sits with me like a whisper I can't ignore. It happened on a Sunday morning in a mid-sized German city. I had just checked out of my hotel and was making my way to the train station, my backpack slung across my shoulders, the morning sun just beginning to warm the cobbled streets. The city centre was busy in a gentle, peaceful way. People waited for trams, chatted with friends, and wandered leisurely with takeaway coffee cups in hand. That's when I noticed her. She was standing in the middle of the street, right on the tram tracks. Odd, I thought, but not immediately alarming. She was wearing a backpack on her front. Not the kind of heavy-duty pack travellers carry, but something smaller. Her clothes were clean, weather-appropriate, and her hair was pulled back neatly. She looked to be in her early 40s. Everything about her seemed normal, unremarkable even. But then she looked at me and started calling out in German. At first, I didn't realize she was talking to me. I kept walking, glancing around to see if she might be addressing someone else. But her eyes were locked on mine. She was persistent. Her voice wasn't loud or aggressive. It was oddly calm, as though she was just trying to strike up a friendly conversation. Still, I felt a twinge of unease, subtle but unmistakable. As I kept walking, I offered a simple, "Sorry, I don't speak German," hoping that would end the interaction. I remember thinking afterward that it was a foolish move. I should have just kept walking without engaging at all. But she didn't stop. She responded, switching seamlessly into English. Not just English, but with a strange phrasing. "Oh, you want to speak American? We can speak American." That's when I knew I had to get away from her. I quickened my pace, turning down a street lined with shops and cafes, and ducked into a crowded bakery. My plan was simple: blend in, buy something, and sit down until I felt safe again. I ordered a pastry and scanned the room for a seat, trying not to look over my shoulder. But I didn't have to look. I felt her walk in. She hadn't followed from a distance. She was right behind me. Within moments, she entered the bakery, ordered something she would never eat, and then scanned the room until she spotted me. She walked right over and sat down at my table. I was stunned. I put in my earbuds and opened a book, trying to appear busy, detached. But she didn't care. She waved at me, smiled, though not a real smile. It felt forced, too wide, too deliberate, like she was mimicking the way people are supposed to behave in social situations. The effect was unsettling, like watching someone pretend to be human. I asked her quietly but firmly if she needed something. She replied that she had seen me walking and thought I looked like I needed some compassion. Her voice was warm but rehearsed. There was no genuine emotion behind it. I told her I was fine, tried to thank her politely while making my disinterest clear. But she kept smiling and then asked if I had money and a place to stay. Yes, I said, I'm fine, I'm okay. Still, she didn't leave. She started talking, rambling about the most random topics. People she had met on trains, dance classes, strange stories that didn't connect. Her English wasn't great and much of what she said didn't make any real sense. But what struck me the most was how calculated it all felt. She wasn't confused or struggling to communicate. She was trying to keep me engaged, trying to keep the conversation going no matter how empty the content. Every now and then, I could see it pausing mid-sentence, thinking hard, as though she were reaching for the next topic to hold my attention. It was chilling. Finally, after several agonizing minutes, she said she would move to a different table if I preferred. I said yes, please, that would be great. She stood up, walked a few feet away, and sat down at the nearest table, close enough to keep watching me. And that's exactly what she did. Even after the conversation ended, she continued glancing over at me. I caught her eye more than once. She'd look away, then pull out her phone and begin texting, never touching the large slice of cake she had bought. She never even picked up her fork. At one point, I noticed a man sitting nearby, another customer. He kept glancing at her, then at me. He looked concerned. I don't think he spoke English, and I certainly didn't speak German, so we never exchanged words. But there was something in his eyes, something that told me he could sense it too, that this woman wasn't right. I sat there as long as I could, pretending to read, pretending to be okay. But my heart was racing, and my hands trembled slightly with every sip of coffee. I kept checking my phone, waiting for the next tram to appear on Google Maps. When it finally showed a 1-minute arrival, I stood up, trying not to make a sound, and slipped out of the bakery. She didn't follow. Not immediately, anyway. I walked fast, barely breathing until I was safely aboard the tram. Only then did I let myself look behind me, scanning the platform for any sign of her. She wasn't there, but I never stopped looking over my shoulder until I reached the train station. I can't explain exactly what it was about the encounter that frightened me so deeply. She never made a direct threat, never raised her voice, never touched me. But something about the way she followed me, the way she inserted herself into my space, watched me so intently, texted someone without ever touching her food, it felt deliberate, calculated, and dangerous. I've thought about it a lot since then. Was she working with someone? Did she see a lone traveler with a backpack and see an opportunity? Was she trying to distract me, while someone else prepared something else? I'll never know. But my instincts were screaming from the moment she opened her mouth, and I've learned to trust those instincts now more than ever. The world, even at its most beautiful, can hide its darkest corners in plain sight. To the woman from that quiet German street, I hope we never cross paths again. Story 5. It was an ordinary shift. Nothing special, nothing strange, just another day at the restaurant where I worked, a casual place known for quick meals and bottomless drinks. Customers came and went, most staying no more than 45 minutes, maybe an hour if they lingered. It was a rhythm I knew well, a predictable pattern that helped the hours pass without much thought. But every so often, something happens that cuts through that routine like a jagged edge, and what happened that day still makes my skin crawl. It started with 2 men who walked into the restaurant and sat down at one of the back booths. At first, nothing about them stood out. They ordered food like any other guests, and my co-worker and I went about our business. But after a while, I noticed something unusual. One of my co-workers leaned over to me and whispered, "Those 2 guys, they're just staring at you." At first I brushed it off, Maybe they were just waiting to order or trying to figure out what they wanted, but as time passed, the staring didn't stop. It wasn't casual or subtle, they weren't just glancing. They were fully turned toward me, eyes locked, watching my every move. I tried to stay calm. I've dealt with weird customers before, but this felt different. Their gaze was intense, predatory. Every time I turned their way, their eyes were on me, unmoving, unblinking. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't even attraction. It felt calculated, like they were studying me, planning something. They stayed far longer than anyone ever does. 4 hours. 4 hours of sitting in that booth, refilling bottomless drinks long after their food was gone. One of them pulled out a laptop at some point, the other half-heartedly scrolled through his phone. But most of the time, they just sat there, silent, still, watching. There was no conversation between them, no laughter, no casual talk, just long stretches of silence and that stare, burning into me every time I walked past. The longer they stayed, the worse it felt. I started to avoid walking in that part of the restaurant. I kept myself behind the counter as much as possible, but I couldn't hide completely. I had to work. I had to do my job. Eventually, one of them approached the counter and asked for ice cream. As I scooped it, he asked me where I was from. "You look foreign," he said, peering at me in a way that made my stomach twist. "Are you from Spain?" The question wasn't offensive in itself, but the way he asked it. There was something unsettling in his tone, like he wasn't just asking out of curiosity, like he already had an answer in mind. When I finally clocked out, I couldn't shake the anxiety. I told myself I was probably just being paranoid, that nothing would happen, that I'd go home, take a deep breath and everything would be fine. But as I stepped outside and started walking down the sidewalk, I turned around. And there he was, the same man who'd asked about my background, the one who'd been staring for hours. He was right behind me. I froze. He didn't say anything, just kept walking, closing the distance between us. I panicked. I stopped in my tracks and stepped aside to let him pass. He did, but not quickly, not casually. He walked past me slowly, like he was still watching, still measuring me. As soon as he was a few steps ahead, I turned and walked in the opposite direction. I pulled out my phone and called my mum, keeping her on the line the entire way home. I didn't run. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, but every part of my body was tense. When I finally reached home and locked the door behind me, I sat down and tried to process it. He hadn't followed me beyond that point. He hadn't said anything threatening, but the way he and his friend had behaved, watching, lingering, waiting, it was wrong. And my gut, my instincts, they were screaming the whole time. Even though nothing physical happened, even though the moment passed, I couldn't let go of the feeling. It stayed with me through the night and well into the next day. I kept asking myself, what were they doing there for 4 hours? Why weren't they talking? Why did they stay so long? And why me? Sometimes you just know. You can feel it in your bones, even if you can't explain it to anyone else. You can feel when something is off. And everything about that day was off. I never saw them again. At least, not that I know of. But the memory still lives in the back of my mind, like a shadow that never quite leaves. A reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just sits quietly in the corner booth, watching. Wait. I've learned to listen to that quiet voice inside me, the one that warns, the one that senses things before the mind can process them. I don't ignore it anymore. And if I ever see those eyes again, fixed on me the way they were that day, I'll be ready to walk away without hesitation. Because it's better to be safe, even if no one else sees the threat, even if they say you're imagining things. Sometimes your instincts are the only alarm you get. Story 6. When I was 15, I moved out of my dad's house. I never talked much about why. People assumed it was just the usual teenage friction, arguments about chores or curfews, maybe just a desire for independence. But the truth is stranger and darker. Even now, when I think about that house, something inside me feels cold. That night, I was visiting my dad. He was upstairs, already asleep, while my younger brother and I were downstairs playing video games. The lights were low, the sound of the game blending with the occasional creaks of the house. Everything felt normal. Until we heard a knock, a soft, rhythmic tapping at the front door. I stood up instinctively, but my brother looked at me sharply and said, "Don't answer that." His voice was unusually serious. At first I thought he might be joking, or maybe just trying to scare me. But the look in his eyes made it clear he wasn't messing around. "Why not?" I asked. He hesitated, then said something that sent a chill through me. "It's our mum." Our mum had passed away, and yet the knocking continued. I didn't know what to do. I walked slowly toward the door, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Then the sound changed, the knocking moved. Dort, from the door to the windows, all of them. It wasn't just one knock anymore. It was a frenzy. The banging circled the house, moving from window to window, loud enough to rattle the glass. It was as if someone, or something, was outside, trying to get in. Not just at the door, but everywhere at once. The windows shook violently with each hit. I looked toward the security monitor on the wall, the one connected to the outside cameras. My hands were trembling as I pressed the buttons to cycle through the different angles. Nothing. The screens showed nothing. No figures, no movement, just the quiet moonlit yard outside. Empty. And yet the knocking didn't stop. My brother stood next to me, pale and silent. We didn't speak. We just listened as the banging moved from one side of the house to the other, again and again, each time more forceful than before. The entire house seemed to vibrate with the weight of it. For 30 minutes, this went on. 30 minutes of relentless pounding on the windows and doors. 30 minutes of watching the cameras and seeing no one. 30 minutes of pretending we weren't scared out of our minds. Then, just like that, it stopped. I couldn't take the silence. It was worse somehow, because it felt like the moment before a scream. I turned and ran outside, desperate to catch a glimpse of whatever had been tormenting us. But as soon as I stepped out into the night, everything was still. The air was cool. The stars glittered above. The yard was empty, exactly as the cameras had shown. No one was there. That might not be the creepiest thing about the house, but it's the one that stuck with me the longest. There are others' stories I could tell, things that have happened before and after. But that night was the turning point, the moment I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. After that, I refused to be in that house after dark, and I wasn't alone in that fear. You see, TAPS, the paranormal investigators, visit my dad's house every 6 months. That's not something I tell people casually. Most wouldn't believe me, but they've been coming regularly for years. They've documented strange phenomena, unexplained noises, and sudden temperature drops. They've seen what the cameras don't, but none of their equipment ever captured what I felt that night. The dread in my stomach, the pounding of my heart, the overwhelming sense that someone or something wanted in. And not just into the house, into us. I don't know what knocked on our windows that night. I don't know if it was a ghost, a spirit, or something else entirely. But I do know that it wasn't just wind or a prank. It was something intelligent. Something that knew how to frighten us without ever showing its face. Something that mimicked the impossible. That took the voice of our dead mother and used it to tap on our door. That night the house stopped feeling like a home. And though I've never seen it since, I still hear that knocking sometimes. Soft, rhythmic, just outside the edge of my dreams. When I wake, there's nothing there. Just silence. But I never sleep easily after. Story 7. In 2022, after years of cancellations and plans postponed by the pandemic, We finally took the trip we dreamed about for so long, a vacation to California. For my girlfriend and me, it was a long overdue escape, a follow-up to all the plans that never made it past 2020. But we weren't traveling alone. Her younger sister was coming along with her sister's best friend. 4 of us, all looking for a reset, something light after the weight of everything the past few years had brought. But there was a heaviness to us too. Each one of us had lost someone. I had lost my mum in 2020 to diabetic complications. She never recovered, and the grief hit me like a wave that never fully receded. My girlfriend and her sister had lost their grandmother not long after Thanksgiving. A heart attack, sudden and final. And their friend, quiet and gentle, had lost her father after a long battle with cancer. We didn't talk about it every day, but it lingered beneath the surface of our trip. Something shared and unspoken. On our last night in Los Angeles, we had just finished eating at Grand Central Market downtown. The food was great, the company warm, and the sky was already slipping into that sleepy shade of orange that makes LA glow in a way no other city can. We sat around the table, laughing about nothing, passing fries between us and making one last list of things to see before the flight out. As we finished eating, I remembered something. Back home, my roommates had asked for one simple souvenir: California weed. And in a city like LA, that's not exactly a tall order. So we pulled out our phones, opened Google Maps, and searched for a dispensary nearby. The first result looked promising. Just 10 minutes away through some quiet side streets. We piled into our rental minivan, set the GPS, and began the drive. At first, everything was fine. The roads weren't busy and the sky had just gone dark. The GPS voice guided us through the turns, each one bringing us deeper into a part of LA none of us recognized. We weren't far from downtown, but it didn't feel like the same city anymore. Streetlights grew sparser. Storefronts gave way to boarded-up buildings and empty lots. We passed under bridges, weaving through blocks dotted with abandoned tents, vacant sidewalks, and graffiti-covered warehouses. We had stumbled into a forgotten part of the city. None of us said it aloud, but we all felt it. My girlfriend's sister broke the silence first. "This doesn't feel safe." We nodded in agreement. It wasn't just a bad neighborhood. It was deserted, lifeless, as if the city itself had turned away. And then, just as we were debating whether to keep going, something happened. The GPS spoke again, but the voice was different this time, not just in tone or inflection. The words weren't part of any normal navigation prompt. "With me at your side," the voice said, "you will always be safe." The van went silent. I looked down at the screen. The GPS had beeped, rerouting us with no input. A new set of directions appeared, guiding us away from the industrial shadows, away from the cracked roads and empty sidewalks. It took us through 3 quick turns, as if urgently rerouting. Suddenly, we were on a bright, open boulevard. Just like that, the tension vanished. There were people walking on the sidewalks again, storefronts, lights, movement. The city had returned. It felt like stepping from one world into another. But the GPS, it had never spoken like that before. I've used Google Maps for years, long enough to know its voice prompts by heart, and that phrase, "with me at your side, you will always be safe," it wasn't one of them. I wasn't running a third-party app. It was just Google's voice, the one I'd trusted on road trips and errands alike. It had never said anything like that. Not before, and not since. The girls were stunned. We replayed it over and over in our heads. Did we all hear the same thing? Yes. Could it have been a glitch? Maybe. But it didn't sound like a bug. It sounded intentional. And the timing. The way it spoke just before we got deeper into that area. The way it changed the route, guiding us towards safety. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had hacked the voice file. Maybe it was a prank update. But deep down, we didn't believe that. We couldn't. My girlfriend said later that she thinks it happened because we were talking about our lost loved ones just before the voice changed. We'd all shared stories on the drive. Little memories of our mum, their grandmother, her friend's father. That conversation, soft and sorrowful, had been hanging in the air like a thread. What if one of them was watching out for us? I've never believed in ghosts, not really. I don't even know what I believe in now. But I believe in that moment. In the way the hair stood up on my arms, in the calm that washed over us as the voice spoke those strange, gentle words, in the way we felt quiet and held, even for a second. We never found that dispensary. We didn't care to. We drove back toward the hotel, hearts still beating fast, windows down, and silence between us. Not a scared silence, a reverent one. Something had reached out. Something had warned us. And whether it was code or spirit or something in between, I won't ever forget it. With me at your side, you will always be safe. It wasn't scary, but it wasn't normal either. It was something else. Something kind. Story 8. A few years ago, I lived in an apartment building just outside the city. It was nothing special. 3 stories, faded red brick, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the laundry room always smelled like detergent and mildew. Still, it was quiet and the rent was cheap, and I'd grown used to the little quirks of the place. The hum of the fridge at night, the way the radiator hissed in the winter. It wasn't home, exactly, but it was familiar. At the time, I worked late nights at a call center downtown. I didn't mind the hours. I liked the silence of the night shift. The way the city dimmed down as if the world was finally willing to be quiet for a while. But it also meant I often came home long after midnight. Most nights, the halls were empty when I got back, the building still and sleeping. But not that night. It was close to 2 a.m. when I pulled into the lot, locked my car and headed toward the building entrance. The lobby light was out, again, and I remember the way the dark glass doors reflected my shape like a ghost. I buzzed myself in and stepped into the narrow foyer. The air was cool and stale, and the old elevator sat waiting at the end of the hall. I pushed the button, yawning, already thinking about my bed. The elevator chimed softly, the doors sliding open with a tired groan. And that's when I saw him, a man, standing in the very back of the elevator. He was wearing a long dark coat, too heavy for the season, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over most of his face. I couldn't see his eyes, just the outline of his jaw, the shape of his hands resting at his sides. I hesitated. Something about him felt wrong. He didn't move, didn't even acknowledge me. Just stood there, completely still, as if he'd been waiting for hours. My instinct screamed at me to take the stairs, to walk away. But I was tired, and maybe that dull fatigue dulled my sense of danger. So I stepped in. The doors closed behind me with a soft thud, and I pressed the button for the 3rd floor. He didn't press anything. The elevator shuddered and began to move. I could hear the cables above groaning slightly as we ascended. The fluorescent light above flickered once, casting a strange strobe across the man's coat. He didn't flinch. He didn't look at me. Just stood there, silent. The seconds dragged. I kept my eyes forward, trying not to shift too much. My chest felt tight. When we reached the 2nd floor, the elevator slowed, but the doors didn't open. Instead, the elevator stopped entirely. A pause, then a sound, a low, electric buzz hummed through the air, and the lights went out. Everything was black, pitch black, the kind of darkness where even your hands disappear. I froze. I couldn't hear anything but my own breathing. Shallow, shaky. I couldn't see him, but I knew he was still standing there. Then, without warning, a sound. The sound of breathing, but it wasn't mine. It was slower, deeper, measured. He was close now. I hadn't heard him move, but I could feel him. The space around me had changed. It was like he had taken a step forward, maybe 2. I couldn't tell how close he was, inches maybe. The air was heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. And then he whispered, not a word, not a sentence, just a sound. Something guttural and low, like a growl filtered through static. I couldn't move. My feet were planted, frozen by some invisible weight. I didn't dare speak. I didn't dare raise my hands. And then, without warning, the light snapped back on. I blinked against the sudden brightness. The man was gone. Just like that. The elevator was empty. I was alone. The door opened onto the 3rd floor, slowly, like it wasn't sure if it should. I stepped out, every muscle in my body rigid, every part of me on edge. I turned back to look inside the elevator, half expecting him to be there again, standing in the corner. But there was no one. I walked to my apartment door, unlocked it with shaking hands, and closed it behind me fast. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the couch, staring at the hallway, beyond the peephole, trying to make sense of what had just happened. In the days that followed, I asked the landlord about the elevator. I said it had stopped working in the middle of the night. He nodded like it was nothing. "Happens now and then," he said. "Old building, probably a short." But when I asked about the man, described the long coat, the hat, the silence, his expression changed. He didn't say much, just looked at me a little too long and muttered, "People see strange things late at night. Best not to think too much about it." I moved out a few months later. I told myself it was for work, that I needed to be closer to the city, but the truth is, I never took that elevator again. I took the stairs, every time. And now, even years later, whenever I hear the soft ding of an elevator, whenever the lights flicker, or the doors open too slowly, I remember that night, that silence, that breath, that space beside me, filled with something that wasn't quite human, and I wonder, just for a moment, if I'd spoken, if I'd turned, what would I have seen? Story 9. This story happened during my first year of college. I had just moved into a small off-campus apartment, a quiet space that I shared with 2 roommates. The building itself was old, paint chipping on the trim, squeaky floorboards and pipes that groaned when the heat kicked in. But it had charm. It felt like the kind of place where you could grow into yourself, where you could read in a sunlit corner or listen to the rain against the windows while making late-night ramen. At least, that's how it felt at first. I'd been living there for about a month when I started noticing things. At first, they were small, just little moments I could brush off. I'd come home from class and find the bedroom door open when I was sure I'd closed it. Or I'd leave a glass of water on the desk and find it empty a few hours later, though I didn't remember drinking it. My roommates shrugged it off. "You're probably just distracted," they said. "College stress, midterms, your brain plays tricks." Maybe they were right, so I let it go. Then one night, I stayed up late working on an essay. The apartment was quiet. Both of my roommates were gone for the weekend and I had the whole place to myself. The desk lamp cast a warm glow across my notes, and the only sound was the gentle clack of keys as I typed. Around 1:30 a.m., I stood up to stretch, my back stiff and eyes dry. I turned to head to the kitchen for a glass of water. That's when I saw him. A man, standing silently in the corner of the room. He didn't move. He didn't speak. Just stood there, in the farthest corner, cloaked in shadow, his head slightly bowed. My first thought was that someone had broken in. My second thought was that I was dreaming. I blinked. Still there. He was tall, too tall. His frame was long and narrow, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to blend into the wall behind him. But his face was the worst part, because there wasn't one, not really. Just the vague shape of features. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin stretched over bone. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would wake the neighbours. I took a step back, then another. My fingers fumbled for my phone on the desk, but when I looked up again, he was gone. The corner was empty, just drywall and an old floor lamp. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with every light on, phone in hand, waiting for something, anything to happen, but it didn't. Somehow, I still had hopes that Nachlinda. When my roommates returned the next morning, I told them everything. They exchanged a look. Then one of them sighed and said, "Yeah, I've seen him too." My breath caught. "What?" "The corner guy," she said, eyes wide. "He shows up sometimes, doesn't do anything, just watches." The other roommate nodded slowly, thought it was just stress, but yeah, I seen him. They'd both seen him. We didn't know what to make of it. None of us believed in ghosts, not really. We weren't the kind of people who read horror forums or watched paranormal shows, but we couldn't ignore it anymore. From then on, we all kept the hallway lights on at night. None of us wanted to be alone in the apartment after dark. We started leaving for campus earlier and coming home later. The space that once felt warm began to feel watched. But he didn't always appear in the same spot. Sometimes one of us would catch a glimpse of him in the kitchen window's reflection, just standing in the living room. Sometimes he'd be in the bathroom mirror, just behind the door. Always silent, always watching, and always in the shadows. Then came the dreams. We didn't talk about them at first. It felt silly, like our minds were just feeding off each other's fear. But when we finally did compare notes, we realized we'd been dreaming the same thing. A long hallway, endless, silent, and at the far end, the man in the corner slowly turning to face us. That's all. He never moved beyond that, never spoke, just turned. But waking up felt like drowning. After a few months, we broke the lease. We told the landlord it was a safety issue, said we needed to be closer to campus, anything we could come up with that sounded reasonable. We never mentioned the man. We didn't think he'd believe us. We barely believed ourselves. The last night in that apartment was the worst. We had packed everything, the boxes stacked in the living room, waiting for the movers the next morning. All three of us were sleeping on the floor, curled in sleeping bags like we were at a sad, haunted slumber party. And sometime around 3 a.m, I woke up. He was there, standing in the kitchen doorway, still as a statue, half in the shadows, half lit by the orange glow of the streetlight outside, watching us sleep. I didn't move. I couldn't. Neither did he. He just watched. And then, slowly, he turned and stepped backward into the dark. Gone. The movers arrived at 8. We didn't say much, just grabbed our things and left. That apartment still exists. I looked it up recently out of curiosity. Someone else lives there now. I wonder if they've seen him yet. I wonder if they've stood at the sink and caught a reflection that shouldn't be there. Sometimes I dream about that corner, about the way the air would change when he was near, about the silence that followed him like a shadow. We never found out who or what he was. We never wanted to. Story 10. When I was 11, my parents moved us into a new house. It was smaller than our last one, a bit older too, with creaky floors and faded wallpaper, but it was ours. I remember the way the sunlight spilled into my bedroom in the afternoons, warm and golden, turning the worn-out carpet into something soft and magical. I liked that room. I liked the quiet. I liked the way it felt tucked away in the back corner of the house, safe. Or so I thought. The room was pretty simple. A twin bed in the corner, a dresser against the opposite wall, a small desk by the window. I had posters of cartoon characters on the wall and a nightlight shaped like a rocket ship plugged into the outlet by the door. It was a kid's room. Nothing scary about it. At least, not at first. I started noticing her about 2 weeks after we moved in. At first, it was just little things. I'd hear scratching sounds at night. Soft, like fingernails brushing against wood. I thought it was mice. My mum said it was probably the house settling. But the noise always came from the same place, the corner of the room, right behind my dresser. I told myself not to be scared. It was probably nothing. Then things started disappearing. Toys, small books, a flashlight I used to read under the covers. I searched everywhere, under the bed, in drawers, in the closet, but they were just gone. I'd ask my parents if they moved anything. They always said no. One night, I dropped a pencil behind the dresser. I pulled it out a little to reach for it, and that's when I saw it. A small hole in the wall. At first, I thought it was just a crack, but when I leaned closer, I realized it was more like a gap, just wide enough for a small hand to reach through. And that's exactly what I thought I saw. A hand. It vanished the moment I blinked, but I swear it was there, pale, small, like a child's. I screamed. My parents came running. I showed them the hole, begged them to look, but when they pulled the dresser away, the hole was gone. The wall was intact. No gap, no crack, just solid drywall. They told me I must have imagined it. I didn't sleep much that night, or the next. I started keeping my nightlight on all the time, not just at night. I kept the curtains closed and the closet doors shut, but every night, just as I started to drift off, I'd hear it again. The scratching, always from the same place. It was like she was trying to dig her way out. I stopped going near the dresser. I didn't keep anything in it anymore. I kept my clothes on the bed or in piles on the floor. I'd tiptoe around it like it was something alive. I couldn't explain it, but I felt watched. Not from the door, not from the window, from that spot behind the dresser. One afternoon I stayed homesick from school. I was lying in bed, wrapped in blankets, half asleep, when I heard a voice. It was quiet, raspy. "Are you awake?" I froze. My heart thudded in my ears. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I just kept my eyes closed, hoping it was part of a dream. Then I heard it again. "I'm still here." It came from the dresser, from behind the dresser.